The Huawei Watch GT5 and GT5 Pro have a brand new heart rate sensor and improved dual frequency GPS. In this video, we will scientifically and systematically test if those changes actually improve performance compared to the previous generation, and of course we'll also compare to many of the other devices out there. As you will see later, some of the results are quite unexpected. But before diving into the testing, let's briefly list the 8 most important features of these brand new Huawei watches. One of the standout features is the improved TrueSense sensor in both watches. This new sensing module has specialized darkened glass in between the LED and the sensor, which should theoretically at least reduce unwanted light reflections and improve signal quality by over 20%. Now, similar to the new Google Pixel Watch 3, the GT5 series offers new running features in the form of advanced running form analysis. This detects ground contact time, vertical oscillation and balance, which could help prevent injuries. But also other sports get improvements like cycling, where you can now see your watch data live on your phone if you want to. And during outdoor activities, there are new color maps that can be used while working out. More importantly, Huawei says that the GT5 series also boasts improved GPS performance with dual band sunflower GPS technology, enhancing distance and pace accuracy by 30 and 20% respectively. Now, this is something I'm of course looking forward to testing. Next, battery life is one of the things that Huawei generally does much better than many other smartwatches on the market. The GT5 and GT5 Pro 46mm models offer up to 14 days battery life, while the 41 and 42mm models offer up to 7 days. Now, the Pro model supports wireless fast charging, being fully charged in 60 minutes. Lastly, the GT5 series supports full keyboard input for messaging apps, including SMS, WhatsApp and Instagram. With that out of the way, let's get to the testing, where this video will be slightly different from my other videos. Due to time constraints, I have to do the testing and the recording in different parts, so I have to find out together how good the Huawei Watch GT5 and GT5 Pro actually are. Now, over the last few days, I've already been doing different exercises to test the heart rate tracking performance of these watches, and these first results are actually super interesting. We'll look at these results first, then tomorrow I'll do a run with both watches, since this is a test I haven't done yet. Then the day after tomorrow we'll take a look at the sleep stage tracking, and finally 3 days from now we'll test the GPS tracking accuracy. Let's get to it. And we will start by looking at what is typically one of the easiest exercises for a watch to track indoor cycling, which is easy because there's relatively little motion and also not that much tension on my arm. And this plot shows you an overview of all the indoor cycling sessions I did, where I compare it to a reference ECG chest strap from Polar, which is along the horizontal axis right here, and which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. And on the vertical axis, we have the non-pro version of the GT5. And if the measurements would agree perfectly, all points should be on or at least super close to this blue line. Now, I did a total of 3 spinning sessions so far, and as you can see in this overview, the results look quite good. Most points are on or at least close to the blue line, but there are a few points a bit away from the blue line, mostly a few above it right here. Still, overall, this looks really good, honestly. The correlation is also quite high at 0.98. Now, the correlation cannot be higher than 1, so a correlation of 0.98 is pretty good. Now, what we see here is the normal, so the non-pro version of the GT5. But the Pro version of the GT5 actually looks very similar. So that's what you see right here. And again, most points are on or at least close to the blue line. Maybe the points are a bit further away from it, especially here below the blue line. But again, I would say we see more points above the blue line right here. Still, the deviation is relatively minor and most points are close to the blue line. We can also see that the correlation is just a tiny bit lower now at 0.97, but more or less the same. But we really need to take a look at the individual rides to see why there's some points above and below the blue line. And here we can see the first example interval spinning session where we do see a small issue. Along the horizontal axis we have the clock time and my heart rate is along the vertical axis, with in blue-green the reference device and the Huawei Watch GT5, so the non-pro version, in red. And as you can see, most of the time the red line overlaps almost perfectly with the blue line. Only right here in the beginning did it not detect a full dip in my heart rate. So my heart rate stayed a bit too high. But overall, this doesn't look that bad. And we see something similar for the Pro version right here. It detected the dip a little bit better, but still not perfectly. But the other parts of the ride were really good. And for this second spinning session, the results look more or less the same. It almost perfectly overlaps. Only right here did it struggle a little bit. And we can see more or less the same thing for the Pro version. And it actually struggled around the same moment. So it struggled right here for the Pro and right here for the non-pro. And this third spinning session might be the best out of all of them. There's a really good agreement between the GT5 and the Polar H10. And we see the same thing for the GT5 Pro. They did struggle a little bit right here and also right here and right here. Overall, this would still be a satisfactory result for me. And we can put these results into context by comparing them against many of the other devices I tested in the past. You can see that in this overview right here. Along the horizontal axis is that correlation value, so the R we were looking at before, and we want that to be as close to 1 as possible. And on the vertical axis, I ordered the watches from worst to best. So the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And both GT5 models are marked in red right here. And as you can see, they're among some of the better performers, but it's a bit difficult to read, so let's zoom in a bit. And we have that zoomed in view right here. So these are all watches with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as you can see, even amongst these, the Huawei Watch GT5 Pro and GT5 are among some of the better performers. They're actually quite close to the older models, so the GT3 right here, but also the 41 and 46mm version of the GT4, and we have some of the other models a bit higher, so the GT3 Pro for instance. Now it's difficult to say at the moment if, for instance, the 46mm version of the GT4 or the GT3 Pro right here are better than GT5 and GT5 Pro. To say anything like that for certain, I would really need to collect a lot more data. But what I can say with some confidence is that the GT5, at least on me, isn't doing better than the older generation models, or at least it will not be a lot better, and it might even be a little bit worse. And if you want to know what the absolute best watches are for indoor cycling, Apple watches are always doing quite well. The Pixel Watch 3 I reviewed a few days ago is also doing really well, and the Whoop strap is also not bad. But in general, Huawei watches are also among some of the best devices out there, and the GT5 is no exception, though I'd hoped that with a new sensor we were doing even better. So that's looking pretty good so far. Both the GT5 and GT5 Pro are amongst the top performers. But I also have to say that this first test doesn't give any indications that they're better than the previous generation models. They might even do ever so slightly worse, though this test is way too limited to draw those kind of conclusions. But where I actually saw the most surprising result is for cycling outside, which is generally harder for watches to track because of the increased bumpiness and my tendency to hold on to the handlebars quite tightly. Let's take a look at that test, but before showing you those results, I'm hoping that my testing has earned a like or maybe even a subscribe from you, because that really helps me convince manufacturers to let me devices before release, like was the case with the GT5s. So if you would be willing to do that, that would be amazing. But back to the testing. Again, here we have a similar overview to before, but now for cycling outside. And indeed, we can see there's more deviation from the blue line now. So we're looking at the non-pro version of the GT5. And even though most points are still at least somewhat close to the blue line, there's definitely a bigger spread of the points away from the blue line. There's no huge deviations, but there's some at least. Still, overall, this is actually not bad. The correlation is 0.93, and I would say anything with a correlation above 0.9 is quite okay for cycling outside. Interestingly and very surprisingly though, the Pro version actually doesn't look as good. The correlation is quite a bit lower now at 0.81, and we see quite a few more points away from the blue line, especially here below it. But also right here we see a bit of deviation. I'm not sure what's going on here. We really need to take a look at the individual rides to see why there's a bit more deviation here. And the first bike ride right here already gives us somewhat of an impression of what is going on. Again, the reference in blue-green and the GT5 in red. You can see that the GT5 mostly agrees with the chest strap, but there's quite a bit more small deviation, so it doesn't agree perfectly, but this will be good enough for me. If we now look at the Pro version, we see that for this ride it had one moment where it struggled right here. It couldn't fully detect this peak in my heart rate, and also right here it struggled a little bit, but overall this doesn't look too bad. This second cycling session right here also doesn't look too bad. We can see that the normal GT5 struggled a little bit more. It had some delays in picking up changes in my heart rate. You can see that right here, but also here, here, and here. And interestingly, in those moments where it struggled, it seems to keep detecting the same heart rate for a while. So we have these sort of step-like patterns where there's a straight horizontal line and then a vertical line. And we can see these are mostly present in moments where it struggled. So right here, but also here, here, and also here. And arguably the GT5 Pro might have done a little bit better for this bike ride actually. There's fewer of these horizontal lines, so we still see them a little bit right here and right here. And interestingly, before for the spinning sessions, we also saw some of these horizontal lines, but at a smaller scale. Let me show you. So here we have the GT5 Pro for the first spinning session. And again, here where I deviated a bit, we see a small horizontal line. And for the second spinning session, we saw something similar. Again, a small horizontal line for deviation. And also here for the Pro version, again, a small horizontal line. But let's get back to the cycling sessions and close off with the last session. So for the GT5 model, this cycling session still looks okay. Though there is some more deviation, it misses quite a few more of the peaks, but nothing really horrible. But there's quite a few horizontal lines right here. And we also see some right here and right here, for instance. However, while the GT5 still looks okay, the GT5 Pro looks quite bad for this cycling session. It basically kept detecting a too low heart rate for most of my bike ride. And actually near the end it detected a too high heart rate for a while. So it's mainly this third session that has a high contribution to the low correlation of the GT5 Pro. And again, let's put these results into context. So this is a similar overview to before, and we want the watches to be as far to the top right as possible. And as you can see, the GT5 and GT5 Pro are doing okay, I would say. But again, let's zoom in a bit so we can read those labels better. And again, here we have a zoomed in view, in this case just with the watches of a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And as you can see, the Huawei Watch GT5 is actually doing quite good. It's among some of the top performers out there. But the results for the GT5 Pro are a bit worse in this case. It's really a little bit lower in this overview. But I really need to collect a few more bike rides because I'm not convinced that the GT5 Pro could be that much worse than the GT5. I expect this is by chance. Again, comparing it to some of the other Huawei devices, we have the Watch Fit 2 and 3 right here, which are doing about the same as the GT5. Also the GT4 is right here, the Huawei Band 8. So again, it seems to me that the GT5 and GT5 Pro aren't doing a lot better than the previous generation, potentially the same or even a tiny bit worse. But again, I really want to collect more data. So if we're to look at the results very superficially, it might seem that the normal non-Pro GT5 is outperforming the GT5 Pro. And I actually thought there might be some arguments to support it. For instance, I figured that the Pro version was heavier, but it actually swapped out the metal band of the Pro version for a lightweight silicone one, making it a few grams lighter than the non-Pro version. Also, though the first bike ride I did was a bit worse for the Pro version than the non-Pro, the difference was quite small. The second ride was more or less the same, and the reason the difference in performance between the two is so big is mostly just because of the single third ride. And given that both watches use the exact same heart rate sensor, I cannot really imagine there's such a huge performance difference. So for now, I would chalk it up to chance that we saw that difference, and I will do some more tests over the next few days to see if we can confirm or refute these findings. But for now, let's move on to the next test I did, weightlifting, which is generally one of the hardest exercises for a watch to track. And here we have the overview again for the normal version of the GT5. And we do see most points on or close to the blue line, especially here in the lower heart rate range. In the higher heart rate range right here, is there a bit more deviation now, and this is somewhat expected. Usually when you start a set, your heart rate increases, but also the tension on your arm increases, and this makes it hard for the watch to accurately detect your heart rate in these moments. So the moment you have a high heart rate, often we see more deviation. For the non-Pro version right here, we have a correlation of 0.9, which is quite okay, I would say, for weightlifting. Most watches do quite a bit worse. And for the Pro version right here, we have a very similar correlation, now 0.87. We see similar patterns as well. In the lower heart rate range, all points are on or at least close to the blue line. But in the higher heart rate range, there's quite a bit more deviation. But again, we need to take a look at the individual weightlifting sessions to see if we can or cannot use this for weightlifting. Looking at the individual weightlifting sessions will really show us where the problems are. Again, the Polar H10 reference is in blue-green, and each time I did a set of exercises, my heart rate suddenly increased, which makes sense. And some of the time, the GT5 is able to follow along with this. So for instance, here in the beginning, it did quite okay, but it also misses some of the peaks. This first session actually still looks quite good, actually. We see something similar for the GT5 Pro, though it might have been a tiny bit worse. Still overall quite okay-ish result, I would say. For this second weightlifting session, it actually did a bit worse, I think. So this is again the normal GT5, and many of the peaks in my heart rate are missed. And we see something similar for the GT5 Pro. So I think both models perform more or less the same, but I think both of them missed too many peaks to be really reliable for weightlifting. By the way, if you're wondering what's the difference between the first and the second weightlifting session, in the first session I mostly did biceps and back, whereas in the second session I mostly did triceps and chest. And again, you're familiar with this overview right now with the two Huawei GT5 models marked in red right here. And as you can see, they are again among some of the better performing watches. And the zoomed in view shows this even more clearly. So these are just the watches with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And as you can see, the GT5 Pro and GT5 are very close to each other, and also very close to some other Huawei devices like the GT Runner, the Band 9, and also the GT3 Pro right here, which might potentially be doing a tiny bit better. But again, we need more data to be sure. You can also see the GT4 models, another Huawei Band 9, and the Watch Fit 3 right here. So overall does about as well as I would expect from a Huawei device. But still, based on the example sessions we were looking at before, I wouldn't want to use the Huawei Watch GT5 or GT5 Pro for weightlifting. There's just too many peaks that are missed. Really, just go for an ECG chest strap. So for weightlifting, the results are not bad by any means, and both Huawei watches do quite a bit better than most other devices out there. However, my conclusion for these Huawei watches is very similar to my conclusion I drew for the Pixel Watch 3 about a week ago. Though the GT5 and GT5 Pro do outperform many other watches, weightlifting is such a hard exercise to track heart rate for that they're still probably not good enough. As I've said before, just get yourself an ECG chest strap if you want or need heart rate information during weightlifting. Well, that's all the information I have at the moment. Tomorrow I'll do some runs and then we'll take a look at the heart rate tracking performance during running. The day after we'll do the sleep stage tracking analysis, and on the final day we'll take a look at the GPS tracking performance and also collect some more bike rides to see if there's still a difference between the Pro and non-Pro version. See you tomorrow. It's actually 2 days later now, not 1 day later. I'm in the office and I was supposed to record this yesterday, but I did both an indoor and outdoor run and both showed some weird artifacts in the data. So I wanted to confirm those findings, so I did another run this morning and the results are interesting to say the least. So let's take a look at them. And let's start by looking at indoor running, which is actually looking quite okay. So here we have the results for the GT5, and as you can see, the correlation is not bad at all at 0.97, and most points are on or close to the blue line. So this doesn't look too bad. And if we look at the results for the GT5 Pro, the results are more or less the same, potentially even a little bit better. The correlation is now 0.99, and again, most points are on or close to the blue line. So that's looking pretty good. So indoor running wasn't the thing that bothered me, it's actually outdoor running that bothers me. We'll take a look at that in a second. Let's first take a look at the individual runs for indoor running. And looking at the individual indoor runs, we can see that the results for the GT5 here are okay, but not amazing. So on a few occasions it followed along quite well with the blue-green line, for instance right here, here and here. But one time it detected a too low heart rate and one time a too high heart rate. So it's definitely not perfect, but potentially good enough. And for the same run, the GT5 Pro in red right here actually did a little bit better. So it mostly followed along really well. Only right here they detected a slightly too high heart rate. But overall, this would be good enough for me. But given that they have the same sensor, I think it's just by chance that one did a little bit better than the other. Maybe the average is the actual performance. But let's now take a look at the results for running outside. And let's start by looking at the results for the GT5 Pro. As you can see, this isn't terrible, but also not amazing. The correlation is 0.9, so quite okay-ish. But there's still quite a few points away from the blue line. There's some right here, but it especially seems that at least some of the points right here are above the blue line, indicating that sometimes they detected a somewhat too high heart rate. I can imagine this might actually be due to a partial cadence lock, where you're running frequency is very similar to your heart rate frequency, and the watch locks onto your running frequency instead of your heart rate. We cannot say this for sure, but this might be a first indication of that. Where the actual concern is for me is the results for the GT5. And I think you will agree that the results for the GT5 actually look quite a bit worse. Yes, there are some points close to the blue line, but again here in the higher heart rate range the points are a bit above the blue line, but now there's also this weird cloud of points right here where sometimes they detected a way too high heart rate. So I'm not really sure what's going on here. This might be partially cadence lock, but I suspect there might also be something else going on here. But let's take a look at the individual runs to inspect those better. And let's start with the watch that gave a better result on me, the GT5 Pro. As you can see, the red line follows along okay-ish with the blue-green line, but you can see that quite often it detected a slightly too high heart rate. So right here, but also right here. So again, as I said, this could be an indication of cadence lock, where it locked onto the frequency of my steps and not the frequency of my heart rate. And you can see that in all my intervals, it seems to have detected a heart rate of about 145 BPM or so, which was sometimes too low and mostly too high. And as I mentioned before, I was curious if a second run would do better. And you can see those results right here. And this actually looks a little bit better. The GT5 Pro generally here follows along quite well with the reference device. It's not perfect, but this might actually be good enough. However, if we now look at the results for the GT5, these are quite a bit worse. You can see that most often it detected a way too high heart rate in all my intervals basically. And again, similar to what we saw before for other exercises, we have a lot of these horizontal lines right here, especially here we see a few horizontal and then vertical lines where I think it just wasn't able to lock onto my heart rate, so it just gave a wrong result. Now the second run I did with the GT5 actually looks a little bit better, so it's still a bit deviating, but it's not as big of a deviation as before. Especially here in the beginning it wasn't doing that well, near the end it was a little bit better, so I'm really not sure what was going on here. I think it's a combination of a bit of cadence lock, and for the first run with the GT5 for some reason it just wasn't able to get an accurate heart rate signal. And again, we can put these running results into context by comparing them against many of the other watches I tested in the past, and you can see that overview right here. Now, I'm not an avid runner, so I didn't test all watches for running, but we do get some impression of which are good and bad. And as you can see, both the GT5 Pro and GT5 aren't amazing for running outside. I think it's just by chance that the GT5 Pro did better than the GT5, and maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle right here, but you can see that many watches did quite a bit better. Actually, the GT4 in the past seems to have potentially done a little bit better, and also the Watch Fit 2 and Huawei Band 9 actually did better on me. So I'm not sure if this is truly because just on me this new sensor doesn't really work that well, or if this is a general finding, but at least on me the GT5 isn't that amazing for running. Now it's actually getting dark out, so I'm gonna head home, try to analyze the data there and see if I can still record it tonight. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm home now and we have a bit of a problem. I quickly wanted to analyze the sleep tracking data before going to bed, and ironically it's quite late actually already. But unfortunately all the reference data I've been collecting over the last week isn't any good. You can see right here, there's all these red parts on the spectrum right here, which means the signal is really bad for all night. So ideally I'd collect a lot more new data now, but unfortunately it's only one night before the watch releases. So I'll collect one more night of data, and hopefully with another EEG device it will work better. And then I'll also try to think of something else. I'm way too tired now, so see you tomorrow. Good morning. I just quickly processed last night's data and it seems it has worked out, so that's good. This overview right here shows you the agreement between the reference device and the GT5. Specifically, we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the reference device were predicted as each sleep stage by the GT5. Each column here sums to 100%, and if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. First of all, we see for this night that the deep sleep agreement was actually quite good at about 70%, and most confusion in this case was with light sleep. Light sleep agreement was mediocre, I would say, at about 52%, and most confusion in that case was with deep sleep. REM sleep agreement is also okay-ish at about 56%, and for REM sleep most confusion was with light sleep. By the way, if you're wondering what this reference device is, this is an EEG device that can actually measure my brainwaves, and it's relatively good at measuring my sleep stages. The only thing it tends to overestimate is awake moments, so we're not going to focus on that for this. However, the results for this night for the GT5 Pro didn't look quite as good. And you can see that quite clearly in this overview right here, with again on the left results for the normal GT5, but now on the right the results according to the GT5 Pro. And as you can see, the agreement is quite a bit worse in this case. Deep sleep agreement is around 50%, light sleep around 40%, and REM sleep in between at about 45%. Now to be clear, I don't actually think that the GT5 Pro is worse than the GT5. I just think that by chance the GT5 did better than the GT5 Pro, but if we collect more nights of data it would be somewhere in between. Now let's quickly look at the individual nights and also how these results compare to many other devices out there. And you can see that in this overview right here with the reference device on top, which has the clock time along the horizontal axis and the sleep stages on the vertical axis. And on the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the GT5. And here I marked the deep sleep as recorded by the EEG device in blue-purple. And as you can see, we indeed see a decent agreement, though the GT5 detects quite a bit too much deep sleep. So indeed, much of the deep sleep recorded by the EEG device was also detected by the GT5, but there's just a lot extra. If we look at REM sleep agreement, which is marked in red right here, we can see this isn't awful, so there's some overlap right here and also right here. But again, the exact REM sleep patterns don't really match. So normally you go through sleep cycles, each one ending in some REM sleep. And you can see I had at least 4 major REM sleep segments here. And I would say that in fact only 2 are more or less detected, and a lot of extra REM sleep is also detected at weird moments. So this actually doesn't look that amazing. And here we have the same night, but now for the GT5 Pro here on the bottom. And as you can see, the REM sleep patterns look very different for the GT5 Pro. So the fact that 2 devices from the same manufacturer that are more or less the same have such different sleep stage detection indicates to me that the sleep stage detection of the GT5 and GT5 Pro probably isn't very good. And we actually see something similar for deep sleep right here. Again, some of the deep sleep is overlapping, but then a lot of extra deep sleep is detected, and right here the deep sleep doesn't match. So overall, I'm not very happy with this performance. And we can actually put this into perspective by comparing these results against many of the other devices I've tested in the past, and that's displayed in this overview right here. Along the horizontal axis we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. And you can see the Huawei Watch GT5 and GT5 Pro right here and here. And as you can see, there is some difference in their performance, but their performance is still mostly similar to that of many other Huawei devices. We can see, for instance, the Huawei GT4 41mm right here and the 46mm right here. There's also the Huawei Band 9 right here. And you can see even some more Huawei devices in the same area right here. So even though the Huawei GT5 based on just a single night seems to potentially do a tiny bit better, I really think this is just random noise, and that overall the truth is somewhere in the middle between the GT5 and GT5 Pro, with the Huawei Watch GT5 and GT5 Pro ending up somewhere right here with all the other Huawei devices. Now, regular viewers will know this, but some of the best sleep trackers are Apple Watches, the H Sleep Pod, the Oura Ring, and second tier devices I would say are different Fitbit and Google devices, and also the Whoop strap. And Huawei devices are really doing a lot worse than these devices. So in terms of sleep stage tracking, that doesn't look amazing. It's about as good as any other Huawei device out there, at least what I can say based on this very limited test. So more testing is needed in the future. But let's next take a look at the GPS tracking performance. The GPS tracking should be very interesting because it should be improved on the new Huawei devices. And the way I tested the GPS tracking is by cycling the same route several times. And if the GPS is very good, the signal should be very consistent. This is not a foolproof test, but the best I can do. And here you can see the results for 3 times I cycled to work, where the green markers indicate the moment that the watch connected a GPS signal, and these are the results for the normal GT5. Now in this case, the normal GT5 should have the best performance, since this actually has the improved version of the GPS, whereas the specific version I have of the Pro version doesn't have this. But okay, looking at the results, what we can see is that the signal was acquired quite quickly, because I always start my ride on the corner right here, and all signals are quite close to that. So it didn't take any extra time for the watch to acquire the signal, which is good. And let's now take a look at the consistency between the signals. So here it's already looking quite good. Many devices struggle in the beginning, but this doesn't appear to be the case for the GT5. And going along the route, this really looks quite good. I had to stop at the post office here, so this is a real signal right here. Then going further along the route, this is looking really good. Maybe a bit of deviation right here, but it might actually have been that I had to take a slight detour right here. This is still looking quite good. The signals are very consistent. Here I actually took a different route, so this again makes sense. Also here the signals are very consistent. So overall, so far, this is looking really good. Super consistent signals right here, also right here, and it basically goes along like that for the entire ride. And we can also take a look at 2 times I cycled back from work. Now one time I actually started at a different location, but the route is the same. Again, the signal was acquired really quickly. Then looking at the consistency right here, there's some deviation, but here it looks okay again. Then going further along the route, looking quite good. A bit of deviation, but overall not bad. Again, here it's very consistent, and other watches struggle right here sometimes. Also here looking quite okay, I would say. I might have stopped at McDonald's one time, and then also here I actually took a different route, and again it keeps being quite consistent. So overall for the GT5 the results are looking quite good. Let's now take a look at the GT5 Pro. And here we have the results for the GT5 Pro, and again I started my route on the corner right here, but twice it took a tiny bit of time for it to acquire the signal, so it could indeed be that this has a worse GPS tracking performance. But then looking at the consistency, this actually looks quite good, maybe a bit worse right here. Then here it looks quite okay, also right here along the rest of the route. I would say that generally the consistency looks quite good, so even the GT5 Pro is doing quite well. So overall, I'm really quite happy with those results. The signals are quite consistent. Overall, one of the better performances I've seen for smartwatches. You do need to know one thing though that Huawei does. They use information on where roads are to nudge the signal on top of the road. So if you're running or cycling in the middle of nowhere, the performance might not be quite as good. Still, overall, for my purposes, I'm quite happy with this. So there's 2 things left to do now. First of all, we need to take a final look at the heart rate tracking performance for cycling outside, and then we draw our final conclusions. But we're gonna do those things once I'm back home, because the calculations for the heart rate tracking are still running, as you can see right here. So the calculations are done, and let's first take a look at the results for the GT5. And as you can see, with more bike rides, it's actually gotten a little bit worse. The correlation is now 0.9, so a little bit lower than before. Not a lot, but just a tiny bit. And overall, you can see that most points are on or at least close to the blue line. but there is a bit more deviation than I'd like to see. Still, generally this is pretty decent for cycling outside, but there are some minor issues. And if we next take a look at the results for the GT5 Pro for cycling outside, we see that these results have actually improved. So where the overall performance of the GT5 was a bit worse with more data, the GT5 Pro actually got better, and the correlation is now higher at 0.85. So they're getting closer and closer to each other in terms of performance, and my suspicion is that with more data they'll perform more or less the same, which of course makes complete sense given that they have the same sensor. So overall for cycling outside it's not a horrible performance, but it does seem to me a tiny bit worse than it might have been before with older models. I would like to do more testing to be sure and also test it on other people, but at least on me it's not the improvement I would have hoped for. So what's my overall conclusion? Well, the GT5 and GT5 Pro aren't terrible watches and I'm sure they'll find an audience. However, for myself, I was hoping for improved heart rate tracking performance, and at least on my body that doesn't appear to be the case. It might even do a little bit worse than older models, at least on me with the current firmware. That might change with future updates, or it might even do better or worse on others. I will therefore also ask Raphael to test this watch for a while and add that in my long-term review. Now, the sleep stage tracking in my very limited test was mediocre, as I would expect from Huawei honestly, and the GPS tracking does seem quite good in my initial test, and this is something I'm quite happy with. So if GPS is your focus, the GT5 or GT5 Pro might be a good enough choice. And if you're wondering what are the major differences between the Pro and non-Pro versions, well, the Pro version is made of better materials, it has trail running with waypoints and contour offline maps, it allows for 40-meter free diving, it has ECG and arterial stiffness detection and fast charging. But besides those things, these watches are more or less the same. I would probably personally go for the normal GT5 if I had to choose, since I really don't need any of the extra features of the Pro. But what about you? If you had to choose, would you get the GT5 or GT5 Pro? Let us know in the comments below. If you do decide to get a Huawei watch, a Whoop strap, an Oura ring, an HD Pod 4, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, want to support the channel and potentially save some money, there are different affiliate and non-affiliate links in the description below. They do not cost you any extra and some provide a discount. Now, given that you watched this whole video on Huawei watches, I think you might like these videos on the Pixel Watch 3 or this video on my top recommendations for sleep tracking. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.